So I'm going to go through a few things for this that should help you understand the poem, and then the second half of this is the audio commentary that you'll see afterwards. So this is a poem by Seamus Heaney. Seamus Heaney is one of the most important poets of ever, but definitely of the last century. And he's an Irish poet, and he mixes his incredible kind of classical knowledge and deep learning with really amazing kind of modern ideas, and it's definitely worth kind of getting familiar with his poetry. But he mixes kind of references to classical myth with ordinary events as well, and so this is really important that we study his poetry. Out of the Bag is a poem that does exactly that. It mixes the kind of childhood memory of where did babies come from with classical myth and references to how are we healed, what are doctors for, is it just a medical experience. He's very much looking at that there's a healing experience as well. We aren't just physical, we're also metaphysical beings. We've got this kind of deeper soul. And he's looking at birth and origin, illness and cure. And it's based around, at the beginning, his own kind of childhood myth, a bit like a Never Let Me Go, when the clones create kind of myths of what's out there. He's kind of starting with this kind of childhood myth of, where do babies come from? He was the eldest of 9. And as a child, he came up with this theory that babies come in Dr. Curlin's bag. And he opens them, puts them together, and then the baby is produced. And then he moves into really sophisticated adult recollections of how are we cured, what is the purpose of poetry, and really suggesting that we are not just physical forms, we are healed through medicine, we are healed through spiritual experience, we are healed through a holistic experience. This is the most complex poem in the anthology that you'll study, but we will come back to it multiple times. So this, now we're going to go through a few of the images. The colour of a spaniel's inside lug, so the inner ear of the spaniel, kind of soft colour of the inside of the bag. So this child looks at the doctor's bag and likens it to a spaniel's ear, the colour inside the doctor's bag. We have a camel coat, fur-lined collar, again, that kind of spaniel-coloured. So we have the image of the doctor's coat as he arrives. Hyperborean blue. The Hyperboreans were, as it says here, mythical people who lived in a land of perfect sunshine beyond the north wind. A little bit reference, there's also, this is referred to in Frankenstein, the idea of kind of getting beyond the ice and snow and then getting to this place where there's, Walton describes it, I think, as a land of perpetual splendour, and the idea that somewhere beyond kind of all the ice and the snow will be this mythical land. That comes from Greek mythology. Poetodoctus is a term used for highly educated and wise poets. It's based upon classical models, but it's the idea of people who blend poetry with learning, who use poetry, who are poets, but also have a lot of learning. They aren't just writing from an uneducated perspective. Peter Levi is mentioned. He's a poet. He was a poet and a critic. He was an academic and also an archaeologist. So that kind of sense of being a poet and kind of scientific or kind of learned in other ways. And he was Oxford Professor of Poetry for those years. The Sanctuary of Asclepius at Epidaurus. So Epidaurus is a place. Okay, Epidaurus is a place, so that's the place. So really important you understand. This is a little bit complicated, but it's fine. Asclepius was the Greek god of healing. So at Epidaurus, they made something called the Asclepion. And it was a huge complex, as you can see here, erected in honour of this god, Asclepius. And it was a huge health centre in the ancient world. It was surrounded by trees, and there's water and springs. And it was the most celebrated place in the ancient world. People went there in the hope of being cured. And so it was a sanctuary. You would go there and be cured, or hope to be cured, and it was at Epidaurus. Robert Graves was also a poet, novelist, critic, and classicist. His poems are also really important. He did lots of kind of interpreting of Greek myths. And so again, that's why Heaney is adding him into his references. Another very learned poet. Lourdes is a famous Catholic shrine where you would go in search of a cure. So Lourdes for Catholics is a very, very holy place where you could go and touch the waters of the spring. But it is a place where Catholics may well go on pilgrimage. Incubation. Incubation is, as it says here, the religious practice of sleeping in a sacred area with the hope of having a divinely inspired dream or being cured. So to go to a particular place to sleep in order to receive healing or dream. And so a lot of people would go to Asclepion and spend a night in the, wait for it, Tomeria. I've said it wrong, I'm sure. But you would basically go into a big hall in the hope that the god Asclepius would give you a divinely inspired dream, or in your sleep fill you with health. But you could also be given surgical treatments at Asclepion. Thurifer is someone who carries the thurible, and if you went to a very traditional Catholic service, they would have incense, and they would shake the incense up and down the aisle to kind of give worshippers in the service and that sense of elevating themselves onto this kind of mystical plane. And it's also, there's lots and lots of stuff about the point of the incense, but that is what it is. That's what's happening. So in the poem, we have this thurifer. Remember, Seamus Heaney was Irish Catholic, and they're burning incense. So there's this moment in the poem when they're burning incense. And Hygeia. So Hygeia was the daughter of the god of medicine. So Asclepius was the god of healing, and his daughter was Hygeia, which of course where we get the word hygiene from. So Asclepius was the god of healing, and his daughter was Hygeia. And so that's the reference there.
This sequence of poems doesn't really give itself up on a first or even a second reading. It is something you've got to spend a bit of time on and go back through. However, once you've done that, so you've annotated it and you've done the worksheets and those kind of things, it's not very difficult. It's deliberately playing around with different perspectives, with Heaney talking about himself as a child, with a child's view of the world, and then filtered through the educated, erudite sort of poet that he became. And it's in free verse, these 3-line stanzas, with one exception, the one line standing on its own, the end of the first section, and lots of enjambment as well, a sense perhaps that he's moving easily with this free verse, moving easily between different times, between memories, and coming back into himself. The title, Out of the Bag, refers most obviously to the idea of the secret is out, the cat's out of the bag, as he, the big secret being him as a child learning where babies come from, and also the fact that his initial belief was that babies came out of the doctor's bag, that the doctor brought them in his big bag, So you've got that going on with it. This playing on meaning. So we start with this simple first end stop line, a statement of the absolute fact as he saw it, as they all saw it. He was the oldest of 9 children. With this is they came in the bag that Dr. Curlin would bring them. And in this way, he also introduces the idea of sort of origins and myths of origins, and the way that there's this kind of family myth of origins, which the adults collude in, and the Doctor himself does it. He shows the empty bag when he comes back down, empty for all to see. So he'd arrived. He sort of claims with the bag closed with the baby in it. We have certainly a sense of the Dr. Curlin very important in this whole poem. He's superior. They respect him. He is their superior in wealth, in education, in every way, and he sort of plays his part. But there's a real affection here. This lovely line, nosy, rosy, big soft hands of his, that sort of that internal rhyme there. The colloquialism as well of the word lug for an ear, the lined insides. There's lots of places where he sort of plays around with pairs of words, and you get a sense, of course, of the adult poet at work here. This is not the register of a child. But what we do have here is a sense of rituals, and ideas of rituals again are central to the poem. This is what happened every time that they got the water ready. He would unwind. Had the cloth, he'd lay the instruments up and wind them back into their lining, and again we've got these patterns of words unwinding us, like a hypnotist unwinding us. He'd wind the instruments back into their lining, and then this is an interesting one. Darken the door and leave, because that sort of almost refers to the phrase "never darken my door again." But he will come again until the next time. And the bag in his hand, a plump ark by the keel. Ark, perhaps this idea of something that carries life in it, like Noah's Ark. And so we have this doctor life. Here we go with these rituals, getting the water ready. That was next, and again this lovely playing around with sounds. The assonance here, soft, sud, luscious, saved for him and savoured by him. That he the rainwater. And yes, he doesn't accept thanks, but there is an expectation that there will be deference. Held his hands out suddenly behind him to be squired and silk lined into the camel coat, and turning that into a verb there, squired and silk lined. He is almost like a god himself. And that idea of him being a god comes here in Hyperborean. Beyond the north wind blew his blue eyes. So the Hyperboreans, these mythical creatures who lived right up in the far north and were perfect and beautiful. And so you've got this idea, and now this is the adult supplying the word. That's certainly not a child's voice, but we're back with the child almost immediately. So his eyes, his blue eyes, Hyperborean beyond the north wind blew, this iciness of them perhaps. And then he says 2 peepholes. And now we're into his imagination. This is purely the child's imagination. You think, well, this is an imagination of somebody who is going to become a poet, perhaps. 2 people, so the locked room I saw into every time his name was mentioned. And the child thinks, okay, if he brings the babies, where does he get the babies from? And he imagines that in the back of his doctor's surgery, he makes them. He has parts sort of hanging up, and he selects the right parts for the baby. And so we have this sudden, the coldness of this, the chill of tiles, steel hooks, chrome surgery tools, and blood dreeps. And I think this is interesting because the word dreeps is not in any way a scientific word, drops of blood. It's an Irish word. It's a colloquial word. This is the child. Blood dreeps in the sawdust where it thickened at the foot of each cold wall and overhead. And, he's imagining the doctor, in his surgery, making the babies, sort of making the selections in the laboratory, little pendant hanging down, teat-hued infant parts strung neatly from a line up near the ceiling. This is, he's thinking, well, okay, so all the little bits, like making a doll or something, a toe, a foot and chin, an arm, a cock. A bit like the rosebud in his buttonhole, this sense of a tiny little baby's a baby's penis curled up, and going back, the rosebud in his buttonhole. This again, then in with everything else. This is a man of some wealth and certainly great standing in the community, and that stands alone as a poem. And then we in the sequence number 2, and here there's a real change, a huge change, a different register, a change in voice. This is what the child became, and we are unable in a way to follow him. He's deliberately using the language that we've got the semantic field of the classics, with Greek and Latin and all sorts of allusions which you're not necessarily meant to follow. We are now almost like in the position of the child in this world that we don't really understand. He has gone a long way. He's travelled a long way from his childhood in rural Ireland, intellectually, physically, except that, as we discover as we move through the poem, he returns in his memory constantly to his childhood home, and to his mother. So we get these 3 highly respected sort of names of doctors of literature: Peter Levi, Robert Graves, and then he puts himself in amongst them, which is right. So Peter Levi, these are going back through time, sort of in the 20th century. Doctor of Poetry is all that means. But by using the Latin, we are straight away in a very different world. Poeta doctors Peter Levi says sanctuaries of Asclepius, called Asclepians, were the equivalent of hospitals in ancient Greece. Or of shrines like Lourdes, says poet Dr. Graves. Or of the cure by poetry that cannot be coerced. So now we have Heaney thinking about the function of poetry. He's not a medical doctor, he's a doctor of literature, he's a doctor of poetry, but he is wondering if, in fact, poetry, what's the function of poetry? It cannot be coerced, it can't be forced. Say I. And then he thinks of his own journey of understanding. He realized that Epidurus, an archaeological site, the whole place was a sanatorium, a hospital, with theatre and gymnasium and baths, a site of incubation when incubation was technical and ritual. And obviously that word incubation takes us back to babies, doesn't it, with this idea of babies being premature babies going into an incubator. But this time incubation was sleeping and waiting, meaning sleep when epiphany occurred and you met the God. So a sudden understanding, an epiphany, a realization, a eureka moment, and you met the God. And perhaps then it's saying, okay, and so is in a way then Dr. Curlin the God, and the sort of the suspension points lead us into another memory, and this is a memory of him at Lourdes, as it happens, hatless, groggy, shadowing myself as the thurifer I was in an open air procession. Right, a thurifer is just a person who swings the incense in a Catholic service, and it is a very minor role. I mean, he's just there to assist to assist. He's not a celebrant or anything. Open air person in Lourdes in 56, when I nearly fainted from the heat and fumes. He is, we get this sense of his own lack of physical strength. He's not like the doctor who was big and strong and big hands and all the rest of it. He's a weedy little thing who in France, Lourdes is a Catholic shrine in France, but people go for healing, and he's nearly fainted. Again, I nearly fainted. That repetition in exactly the same form in consecutive lines. This sense of he's not he's not got any strength at all. As I bent to pull a bunch of grass and fainted. And hallucinated, not fainted, and hallucinated Dr. Curlin at the steamed glass. And then we discover that actually Dr. Curlin taught him the truth about where babies come from. Not his parents, it was Dr. Curlin who in their house, in the scullery, which is a sort of the outside kitchen where the washing up went on, the scullery window, starting to draw with his large pink index finger dot-faced men with button spots and a straight line down their fronts. So this is his representation of the genitals, and women with dot breasts, giving them all a set of droopy sausage arms and legs. And so he's taken upon himself to tell the oldest child in the family exactly where babies come from, and then and he has a moment then of epiphany, a miracle. The baby bits all came together, swimming in his soapy big hygienic hands. So he's sort of he's remembering that, but then he seems to be combining it with his previous idea of the doctor making the baby. The baby bits all came together in his big hands. And I myself came to, blinking and shaky in the windless light. So this now is him in the future, but still Dr. Curlin and his family home important to him. This very short third section doesn't have anything about the family, but does then explain what he does with these bits of grass that he was pulled. Bits of the grass I pulled, I posted off, and he posted them to people who were having cancer treatment. To one going into chemotherapy and one who'd come through. And there's a sense that he's not a medical doctor. He's quite powerless. The most he can do is pull up grass in these places of healing. And I think it's a little unclear, or maybe he does it in both places, as to whether this is in Lourdes or whether it's in Epidaurus, the precincts of the god. It's maybe he does that both times, but all he does is pull up grass and send it in this kind of slightly ineffectual way. Maybe we are also meant to think about whether it is his poetry that is, as he suggested, a bit of a cure. And he shows here an apparent belief in the ancient Greek gods and goddesses. So he's and just notice again, here's this playing with words, midday, mid-May, as he does through. And then the very site of the temple of Asclepius, it's just a site. It's an archaeological site. And I wanted nothing more than to be visited the very eye of the day at midday by Hygeia, where we get hygiene from, the daughter. So this belief in gods and goddesses. Her name still clarified the haven light. She was the undarkening door. Now that's interesting because he talked earlier about Dr. Curlin darkening the door, whereas Hygeia, this ancient Greek goddess of healing, it only brings light, is the suggestion. So he's playing around with ideas. It's not a definitive answer to anything. It's just thoughts, feelings. Where do cures come from? What's origins of life? What's significant? What's been important in his life? And then in number 4, we are back. We're back to his origins, back to his mother's bedroom, the room I came from and the rest of us all came from. Okay, so perhaps there's a tacit understanding now that unlike the beginning where he says they all came in Dr. Curlin's bag, well, it was actually this room, it's his parents' room, isn't it, where they all come from. Stays pure reality, and we get a couple of times this idea of reality, pure reality, and incubating for real. And it's likely that this is just in his memory. Stays pure reality where I stand alone. Him remembering his mother when he goes up after she's had the baby and visits her, and he stands alone, perhaps as the oldest child, being allowed to. She's asleep in sheets put on for the doctor. Again, this sense of respect for the doctor and also for the miracle of childbirth. Special sheets, the best sheets, wedding presents that showed up again, bridal, and usually useful at births and at deaths. The sort of the important movements of birth and life in a rural community. Me at the bedside, incubating for real, so sleeping and waiting and incubating for real, appearing to her. So for a moment, it's from her point of view. This her oldest son, as she sort of dozes after childbirth, and again look at that playing, that putting the two words together and playing with them. We've got appearing. as she closes and opens her eyes, then lapses back into a faraway smile. And she is, and we end beautifully with the mother's voice. So it's his memory, but this is the truth. And it's his mother who actually creates life. It's his mother who brings life. That the secrets, it is all out of the bag. And then we've got this gorgeous bit, that hoarsened whisper of triumph. She knows what she's done. It's important, but she doesn't actually take credit for it. And what she does is maintain the fiction. It was nothing to do with her. What do you think of the new wee baby the doctor brought for us all when I was asleep? That she, she credits, she plays it down. She credits Dr. Curlin of doing it. The doctor brought for us all, including her. This idea of a baby being a blessing as well, even though this is, this is not a rich family, but every baby is greeted with joy, and we are firmly in this idea of Irish culture and the importance of family, the importance of memory, as well as education for the poet. So you can definitely look at these sections. Some people call them separate poems. It's a poem sequence separately, but they only really make sense when you put them all together and you see his movement from one thing to another, from the family, as far away almost as he can get intellectually. Traveling, he goes to Lourdes. I imagine him there as quite a young man. Then he's gone to university. He's become a doctor of literature, and is friends with these great names and uses all this erudite language which ordinary people can't understand. And we're not. I think that's the point. We're not meant to. We are lost amongst these references. But he comes back to the concreteness, to the pure reality of the bedroom, his parents' bedroom, where he was conceived, and all his brothers and sisters were conceived and were born, and to his mother, and only she is given actual direct speech, and this idea that she has incubated the baby, she's been asleep, and the baby has appeared like a miracle.